I'm Ashton Addison from Blockwest Capital for Investment Pitch Media and the Crypto Coin Show. And today on Blockchain Interviews, we have Pat, the project lead at Evrynet. Pat, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Thanks so much, Ashton, for having me.
You're very welcome. Evrynet's working on some interesting DeFi solutions, looking to integrate into what I hope to be a holistic cross-chain, multi-blockchain ecosystem where everything is just working cohesively, and Evrynet's playing a part in that. So let's start our conversation off, Pat, by just diving into a high-level overview of Evrynet and those specific solutions, and then we'll jump into the details after that.
Yeah, thank you. So essentially what we're trying to build here is a CDFI ecosystem. So we want to bridge more of a CeFi assets players, institutional investors, more into DeFi. And that's because we see, an opportunity, especially in the region that we're in Southeast Asia. We also have a close ties with a lot of, I would say, traditional institutionals that are household names in Asia. If you're not really familiar, I'll sort of run through some of them. So, for example, there's CP Group, one of the largest conglomerate here in Thailand. There's Hanwha, a conglomerate in Korea. Seven Banks, obviously a bank in Japan. Uni-President from Taiwan. But we also have other partners, right, in the crypto world. There's Sela and Kyber Networks, who we have a close technical development together. So through all these connections and partnerships that we have, we see a big gap of trying to bring more institutional investors into DeFi. And, obviously an ecosystem, a CDFI ecosystem sounds very big. It sounds very big. And it's true. It's a sort of big vision of what we're trying to do. But obviously with anything, you got to start with something specific, something, to build a cornerstone off of. And as in any, financial system, you have to start with the liquidity. So that is our focus right now, is to build a DEX that can support institutional investors to bring their liquidity into DeFi.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Those big players in Southeast Asia, I'm curious on, where institutions are standing between holding digital assets, using centralized finance to earn interest, and then DeFi, all have different kinds of risks and rewards. And obviously, that big money, creating the liquidity pool first is what you mentioned, is the focus. I think that's important. There are a lot of DEXs that are popping up, like Uniswap, for example, that has a lot of liquidity, and that seems to be the backbone of the foundation of the DEX. Is that what the focus is right now, or are you moving those institutions to bring more liquidity, to just bring pools up so then you can start a DEX on top of that? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, I think even when we're talking about institutional investors, right, there really is two types, right? There's the traditional institutions that invest into the CeFi assets currently. There's also ones who are more active in DeFi. So obviously their needs is quite different. So one is on the more traditional, someone who are not familiar with DeFi or even cryptocurrency in general. It needs to have a better, basically, UI UX that fits with their needs, and also even in terms of unclear regulation that is preventing some of them to actually jump in. At the same time, there are those who are already involved in cryptocurrency or invested in the space heavily. And from our discussions on what we talked about, we see that these players are active more in the centralized exchange rather than in DEXs as much. I think partly is a lot of them said they're more familiar with, for example, an order book style format, because that's sort of what they're operating in. Having a algorithmic trading. So that's sort of something that we take to heart, and we're trying to build essentially a DEX that can support institutional trading, beginning the one or more into the cryptocurrency, but at the same time building other infrastructure, other UI UX, other on and off ramp to bring more traditional institutional investors into DeFi as well.
Interesting. So with the Evrynet DEX that you're building, there are, as I mentioned, there's a lot of DEXs, right? And obviously liquidity and having a high amount of value locked into the DEX is important. But because there's already so many, how else can you differentiate to make institutional investors want to use Evrynet DEX instead of some of the major DEXs that have billions potentially locked in them? Is it those things that you just mentioned about just the order book and making it look like it's a centralized exchange and not actually DeFi? Is that the secret, or are there other potential competitive advantages to entering into the DEX market?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of a DEX, what the difference between a DEX and I guess a liquidity pool and a centralized exchange is, it's not just liquidity pool model versus an order book, right? It's also other decentralization parts like the custodian of funds. If you're in centralized exchange, your funds is basically controlled by the exchange itself, whereas in DEXs, you yourself control the funds. So combining sort of two, we're trying to build a more I would say any trading experience similar to what you would find for a centralized exchange, but still you would retain that decentralization of your funds or your other visibility, for example, or permissionless.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and where is Evrynet at with the liquidity pool and the DEX that you're building right now, and like how long has your team been working on it?
So we're quite a new project. So we've actually listed our token late last year in October, and we launched our first, I would say, the traditional DEX on BSC towards mid-November. And we're building a new DEX essentially to, as I mentioned, the order book DEX on Solana. The first version will be coming out in early Q2. And it would interact both of what we've launched before and sort of the ones on Solana. So this is sort of what we've alluded to in terms of the cross-chain.
Very cool. Yeah, I think that's important, especially with the backlog and the transaction fees on the main network that the DEXs are on. To be able to have that cross-chain is important. And you mentioned there about the Evrynet coin already coming out late last year. I'm curious on how that fits into the ecosystem, how it provides value for the stakers, for lenders and borrowers, and if it has any other governance functionality.
So every token was meant to be sort of a utility of our entire ecosystem and also rewards. That's currently what's being used for our DEX on BSC, and we'll be incorporating this into the DEX that we're operating on Solana as well.
Very cool. And is that usable in the functionality that you have right now, or is that like a planned integration in the near future?
There's some sort of integration plan that are coming out. It's not something that we are comfortable sharing right now, but we'll come up with more details sort of through our social media. Definitely.
And with the landscape of, I feel like DeFi just continues to explode in 2022, and I feel like the geopolitical environment and are bringing more and more people into decentralization, especially on decentralized exchanges as opposed to centralized exchanges. I've felt that there's been a lot of news about warnings potentially about the risks of centralized exchanges, and more people are moving into decentralized exchanges because of that as well. Are you noticing a trend, and are you trying to ride any kind of trends where the money is flowing to specifically inside of the digital asset ecosystem?
Well, I think that's definitely where we think is going to happen for DEXs. I think DEXs are going to see higher trading volume. That's not to say that it would replace centralized exchange in terms of the trading. But I think for a lot of people, I think in the past, 1 year or so, you've seen a huge rise in the trading volume for the DEXs on the major DEXs. But also, I think most of those come from large institutional trade as well. So I think that's definitely where the market's going. But at the same time, I think DEXs are still not fully supportive of institutional traders. So one of the things is the liquidity issue that's certainly something that we look to solve as a problem to be able to support more institutional trading.
Awesome. And with the next few months here in 2022, what are the main focuses as you continue to build out the platform and bring more institutions in?
Yep. So obviously we mentioned, so we are building the order book DEX voting. We are offering an API that to connect bots for algorithmic trading. We'll introduce more cross-chain liquidity aggregation. So for example, users can use liquidity on, for let's say BSC as a collateral to borrow credits on Solana to trade, so that asset doesn't need to move over cross-chain. We'll look to do more partnerships and APIs with custodian to allow for essentially similar types of credit minting, and also just more diverse products, right? So complex derivatives product like perpetual products or leveraging and margin trading. So for the current focus is to replicate or to build infrastructure to support institutional trading.
Awesome. And as institutional trading just continues to grow, I'm really excited to see where it will be at in a year from now or 2 to 3 years. Do you have any vision or foresight in where you want Evrynet to be as a solution 3 years from now in the digital asset space?
Yeah, certainly. So obviously, as I mentioned, the DEX's liquidity building is our first sort of focus. But once we've started build this part, we'll use this as we can use this as a launch pad to actually introduce, connecting more CeFi assets into DeFi world. We can also look in terms of the past that we've looked at in terms of the problems of financial inclusion. Allowing for this liquidity to channel into things like peer-to-peer lending or even project finance in the region or in other parts of the world. So I think there's a lot of room for growth essentially, and it's very limitless in terms of the possibility. And 3 years is a very long time, right, in crypto world. So we're taking a step at a time. We're focusing on building this part, and then. Well, I guess we'll assess, after a year to see where we are and where the biggest opportunities are. But certainly, these are the areas that we're looking at as a big opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah, it is a long time, and it's almost impossible to be 100% correct with that much time ahead. But I'm always curious on, the vision and where it's going to be and where you project it, and then of course you reevaluate as we continue to grow on. And as Evrynet continues to grow, what are some of the main focuses in expansion? Are you just looking for more institutions to bring their capital there, or for other team members, developers, other retail traders and crypto traders to join in with Evrynet as well?
Yeah, so I think I talk a lot about institutional traders, bringing them into DeFi, but a lot of the things that we're building as a platform also can benefit retail traders, and that's certainly something that we're not neglecting. So we do plan to have things like referral programs to bring more retail traders in. That would be that would incentivize people to come in more as a group that could share and have some sort of trading fee sharing, and also in terms of. We're talking a lot about education on cryptocurrency trading, right? That's not solely on institutional traders, but also on retail traders as well, right? So a lot of people are, they want to get in, but they don't know exactly how to trade or what to look for. So obviously there are people who know. We could introduce things like copy trading, so allowing people who know to trust other traders with some sort of fee sharing. So those are certain things that are sort of in our minds and we're looking to explore. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do.
Definitely, and that's great to know about the retail trader and just your everyday crypto traders as well. It's not just for the big boys. So for the crypto people and everyone in the audience right now who's watching that want to learn more about Evrynet, about the pools and get involved with the socials and the community, what is the best place for them to go to do that?
So we're active on Twitter. We have our Medium as well, and our community we both have on Telegram and Discord. And I'll share the link with you so you can put it in the link.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'll put that in the description. Appreciate you coming on, Pat, to speak about Evrynet. All the best with the roadmap milestones that you mentioned here. I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out, and more institutional capital coming into DeFi as well is always exciting. Thank you so much for your time, and let's follow up in the near future.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.